Walking in a winter wonderland.
Yeah, man. It's almost March. It's February 20th, the day we're recording this. And yeah, a lot of snow on the ground.
I'd say about 9/11 over here.
Yeah, I think that probably about the same. And that is like crippling for this area.
I would imagine this is the most I've seen. There was the one in like 14 that was pretty big too that I've seen here. I think growing up, obviously, we would get like 3 feet in DC every couple of years. At least it seemed like 3 feet. I mean, what's the biggest snowstorm you've seen? Something like that?
Oh, in Buffalo? Oh,
yeah.
Dude, we would. Yeah, I mean, they're certainly over 3 feet.
I saw Dirty Buffalo closed early or whatever, and a restaurant here, and they said we would love to do it Buffalo style, but we have to be cognizant of people.
Well, that's just it. I think that when you have restaurants that are open, man, then you're inviting people, to come and visit them and eat, and the whole deal is keeping people off of the road. People lose their minds.
I'm gonna after this, I plan to go outside, see if I can get the Jeep in a position to take it on the road and see what we got.
Yeah. So for those,
that
are wondering, well, for the same deal. So for those that are wondering, the run streak does continue. I was out there this morning.
It was not.
I did run in shorts, and so that's done. We're good.
I think I asked you this like a year ago. About 5 years ago, you were going to stop after Boston, after you qualified and ran Boston. You weren't gonna keep the streak anymore. Like, is there anything? Are we close? Like, have you thought about it? Like, have you legit thought about canceling the streak, ending the streak?
No, I mean, I just my body feels good.
There you go.
And it's just part of, dude. This is part of my life at this point. I mean, I throw a podcast in, or listen to a book, whatever the case is, and it's just part of my day. I don't even have to think about it. I do have to think about it when it's cold and when it's snowing. And like I told you, and we've talked about on the show before, is that like the key is to start. If you record your runs with a watch or some sort of a wearable, you hit start and start recording before you leave the home. So like once you start, you're committed and you just have to go. Because if you go outside and you feel that breeze and the wind chill is 19 or whatever it is, then it's super easy then to just turn around and go back in the house and call
it. Peace. Like I'm sure many people who had a streak today, but who knows? Taylor, is there anything that you've done for almost 10,000 days like Tim has?
Eat, I guess.
Yeah.
Other than
wake up.
But that's the thing, dude. It's so funny you say that. Like, I do want to do like I've never done a 24-hour fast. So that when I do a 24-hour fast, that will technically break my eating streak that has been going on for quite some time.
Unless you do it no, because if you eat on a Tuesday,
I guess I guess technically you would have to start and end at midnight, right?
Yeah, these fasts seem interesting. I've seen some documentaries on like 40-hour fast where they just drink water or something like that, medically watched or something like that. But I mean, what is it? Eastern Hemisphere or is it Western? A lot of people in that culture do it a lot on a fairly regular basis because it's a cleansing mechanism.
Yeah, I think that. I can't remember what it is, and I don't want to be. I'll get it wrong, but they encourage a 24-hour fast every so often, just from a cell something. I can't think about it, but it is good to get rid of the toxins. And
there's a big religious play to it as well. So a lot of religions encourage fasting. So, but I have not partaken in any of those. I feel like my body would just shut down. And then I don't know if I'd be able to make it.
I do think a lot of it is mental.
Sure, it's all mental.
And like, you start to get, for me anyway, I start to get a little hungry. I'll have a cup of coffee or whatever, and that usually will, or a glass of water, and keep on powering through. But
well, exciting
Taylor,
day. Taylor, you and I have never met.
We have not. I've seen you on stage a couple of times, whether it's like a startup pitch event or something. But no, we've never met in person.
Well, still not today.
You're new to the area, right?
I am. Yeah, I moved to Virginia Beach almost 2 years ago. So yeah, I think we moved in like around like March, April, maybe closer to Q2 or like 2022.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Atlanta. So I grew up in a suburb outside of Atlanta. Spent a good amount of time there before moving out to the Bay Area and then coming out over here.
What's that rock called there that you climb up?
Stone Mountain.
Stone Mountain. Yes.
Yeah. It's Atlanta's a great place. It's what I never really understood or I took for granted and then moved to Virginia Beach was Hartsfield, the airport in Atlanta. You could go anywhere pretty much in the world and it was fantastic. And I never knew what a layover was. And then I moved to Virginia Beach and all I know are layovers.
Yeah. So, it's like, where do you want to go to Charlotte? Do you want to go to Atlanta? Or if you want, you can go north to Philadelphia or Dulles or something. But yeah.
Yeah, you can go to Denver. So there's a direct flight to Denver now. So but getting to California, to San Francisco, might as well go to Europe.
So were you able to see the rise of Atlanta then? Or was it, how much of that were you able to witness?
Yeah, so I grew up in a suburb called Alpharetta. And when we first moved out there with my family, it was like right out at like the skirts of farmland. And so, yeah, it was crazy in that originally, like you drive, I don't know, 15 minutes down the road and you run into a bunch of farms. And then all of a sudden, Atlanta started getting much larger. And then all of a sudden the farmland kept being pushed back further and further and further. And now when I go back to visit my parents, I couldn't even tell you where the closest farm is, just because it's all development. And it's a lot of the folks who've moved to Atlanta, commute into the city, and then start and raise their family outside of Atlanta. So yeah, it was quite the experience. And also during that time after college, I went to Auburn, and when I graduated, I moved back into the city. And so got to see the kind of like the rise of the tech scene slowly start making its way into Atlanta. And yeah, it was an interesting experience. I would say one of the reasons that I left Atlanta was the tech scene, while it was starting to occur, it was still pretty nascent. And so like there were small little pockets of like startup incubators. I think it's called Atlanta or Tech Atlanta Village or something like that was one of the early ones, which was like the Calendlys and the Mailchimps of the world is kind of where they kind of spun out of. But now you have companies like OneTrust, Stored, a lot of like pretty high flying startups that raise significant amount of capital out there. And a lot of it's been driven through like the incubation through the Georgia Tech. They have a private public partnership between the universities.
It's supposed to be one of the best too, as actually being private public, where they actually, I mean, I think there are a lot of those things, in the country, but they're not as strong as Georgia Tech's, and they're very open to the outside world, which I think is good. I used to go to a bunch of conferences in Atlanta and loved it there. It's a fun little place, and met a lot of people. Because you just said MailChimp's from there, right? Isn't that where they?
Yeah. It was funny, like, so I know I have a lot of friends, and when I would come back from San Francisco to Atlanta, I always wanted to like talk with the kind of the movers and shakers within the ecosystem. And so one of the unique things that happened within the MailChimp experience was they got acquired by Intuit, I want to say for a couple $2 billion.
Yeah.
And the founder owned majority of the shares within the company.
And even bootstrap business. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It was a bootstrap business. And so there were only a few number of people that actually made out with a significant amount of capital. And one of the things about the Bay Area was when we were selling our home in San Francisco, it's the market isn't cyclical based on what you would think about like interest rates or other things that are normal, like real estate markets. In San Francisco, it's the IPO market. So is the IPO market open or closed? And that was ultimately what would drive home prices. And that was liquidity. And then you get liquidity, aka a lot of startups would go public, and then all of a sudden people would have a lot of cash on hand. So they would go buy homes, et cetera. But because MailChimp, because it was bootstrapped and only a few number of people made a significant amount of capital, a bunch of the startup folks in the scene were like, wait, why don't we have shares in these companies? And so a lot of my friends that worked at a bunch of these startups normally weren't getting the same amount of equity shares as early employees would at startups in the Bay Area. And so then all of a sudden it kind of created this mechanism to now drive for more equal opportunity and distribution when it came to shares within a company. So it was an interesting, and that was only like a few years ago too. Like I want to say like within the last,
they said the deal closed November 1st of 2021.
Yeah. And so like, for example, I know OneTrust, which is a large corporation in Atlanta. It's a big startup there. They had a number of employees that had some equity, but shortly after that, they went and revitalized their equity plan because there was so much backlash in the city of Atlanta. And that's like that's one of the aspects of like how you create like entrepreneurial ecosystems is like the replenishing of capital back into the ecosystem. And if it's only kind of kept within a small group of people, then it's hard to replenish back into everyone else.
Yeah.
A lot of people have talked about that cycle here and how that cycle, first of all, there's not a lot of exits, but then the ones that do, is there that cycle coming back through where it's like, okay, you did the thing, now you invest in everything back. And so we used to always talk about that and how, those people who have had those exits, make sure that they're writing checks back into it, getting involved in as much capabilities as possible, because there isn't a huge number of it. So if they don't do it, then you don't have what those other communities are doing. So it can be a struggle bus.
Yeah. And I think like tailoring or like piggybacking on that, I think Virginia Beach, when you think of exits here, exits are usually like within real estate, right? Real estate isn't like, if you look on the scale of risk, right? Venture and real estate, right? On the two opposite end of the spectrums. And so I think that's one of the difficult things within Virginia Beach is most of the liquidity that's occurring here is much more in like physical assets, such as like real estate. But when you look at venture, it's like the riskiest bet. So like when you go talk to people distributing capital here, like their perception of risk is completely different than what the perception of risk when it comes to early stage startups.
Yeah. And that it's a cultural shift that has to take place. And that's something that I talk about a lot and it's going to be educating a lot of people just in terms of what venture is and the risks, everything. I mean, we're starting almost from scratch, and because it is a lot of older money and it's tied up in real estate.
Yeah, I mean, it'll eventually come. I think like eventually that money gets cycled through to their next in line, right? And they're much more risk prone, right? And so you'll start seeing some of that kind of get distributed down a little bit. But I think it also then comes into like opportunities, like where the best opportunities exist, right? And yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely those in Virginia Beach. I think it's easier to find them to an extent than it may be in like a large developed ecosystem like the Bay Area, where there's tens of thousands of deals, right? And so it's hard to but like, for example, if you can like execute well in Virginia Beach, you can move very quickly to the top of the picking line, right? And you can then attract a lot of capital that way.
But even from just like a talent perspective, it's like, okay, if there's only one career that you can go to and something happens with that company, like where do you go afterwards? It's like, okay, like maybe you should go to a place where there are multiples of the company, of the industry, the vertical that you're looking at. And I think that's a challenge too with a lot of these people. It's like, well, I mean, like there's one company. I like the company a lot, but if it doesn't work out, I got to move anyway. So I think that's a challenge.
What led you to San Francisco? How did that move happen?
Yeah, so I started my career at KPMG and started in their audit practice. And so a lot of my time in the first years of my career was working with large corporations, getting to see like how the financial kind of ecosystem works in the back end. And during that time I always had the entrepreneurial spirit, right? So I was always tinkering, playing with startup ideas, like trying to go to like these growth hacking events, spinning up websites every time I had an idea, and found myself enjoying more of the idea of like building something from scratch versus kind of being what I call a cog in the wheel. But the nice part about KPMG is it gave me the opportunity to travel around the United States and sometimes around the world. So I got to experience other areas, spent a lot of time in New York, and then started spending a lot more time on the West Coast. And during that time, the Bay Area, like the tech boom was occurring. Everyone was moving from New York to San Francisco. And I felt like I wanted to be kind of a part of that story. And eventually I convinced KPMG to move me out there after I moved into their advisory practice. And after 2 years of trying to convince them, they moved me out to the Bay Area. And that was really what started it. I legitimately moved with 2 suitcases on a Southwest plane on a one-way ticket, and moved into a place that I found on Craigslist. And I had one friend that I knew from KPMG that moved out there, and that was it. And yeah, it was kind of like I was like, why not? Right. I had a good career. I saved a good amount of money. And so it was like, why not? Right. Worst case scenario, I can always come back home. Fast forward, I never did come back home, but
wow,
that was the idea.
And then we're marching through the timeline here. You ended up, you had a little time with 500 startups. Is that right?
Yeah. So after just a little stint before that, so I moved out there with KPMG. What eventually happened was instead of flying from Atlanta to New York, I was flying from San Francisco to New York. So I would jump on the red eye on Sunday night, land in LaGuardia, shower in the Delta Sky Club Lounge, drive up to White Plains, work Monday through Wednesday, then take the train down to Manhattan, work there on Thursday, and then fly back Thursday night. So then I was like, I did that for a number of months. And I was like, if I moved out to San Francisco, like, why am I doing this? Right. And so I eventually left and joined another consulting company called Slalom. And the whole premise of the company was work and consulting very similarly, but in where you live. Right. And it was the whole idea is like, by doing that, you can invest within your time, your family, relationships, etc. So I joined that company and worked on a number of projects, Genentech, worked for some of the tech companies. But my main project there was I did the merger between Alaska Airlines and Virgin America. So a few months after the deal closed, I came on as a project manager for Virgin America for one of their integration streams, and eventually found myself in the integration management office. And so got to see kind of integrating 2 airlines. And eventually, surprisingly, I was then flying from San Francisco to Seattle. But after that, I really I had this perspective was again, I moved to San Francisco to be a part of the startup ecosystem and scene, but all I'm doing is working on these large corporations again. What am I missing out on? Right. And so then I got connected with the team at 500 Startups. 500 Startups is what's now called 500 Global, which was an early stage venture capital firm investing in hundreds of deals a year, one of the most active venture capitalists, along with Y Combinator. And I joined as the chief of staff of the CEO. And so got an amazing experience learning all things venture, all things early stage, got thrown, jumped right out into the deep end into early stage startup land. And eventually found love with it.
Yeah, that's definitely jumping into the deep end. But what a great opportunity there. How long was your stint with 500 Startups?
Oh gosh, I should know this. I would say a little north of 2 years. I mean, in startup land, timing is an illusion, right? We call it dog years, right?
Right. That's what I was.
So that's why it's hard to I can't. Yeah, it was, while it was maybe, I think it was a little north of 2 years. It felt like an eternity at that time. But one of those things that what I would say is I'd wake up super excited to go to work, and but then go to bed physically and mentally exhausted.
At least you weren't doing the cross-country trip every day, though.
Yeah.
That
would be brutal.
Every week.
Yeah.
How many miles did you get? Did you get the miles? Were you able to
Yeah. I still have a bunch of Delta Sky Club miles. I'm like lifetime Marriott Gold or Platinum right now. Like it's like It was one of those things. It was like for a long time I hated staying in a hotel. Like it was just like, I don't know. Like a hotel is equated to like work, right? Like when you travel, and at least when I was in my like from mid 20s to like early 30s, like it was all you did was just wake up, go work, and then come back to the hotel, and there's really nothing else to do, and so you would just work more. So it was just like it's funny. Like all my friends were like, "Oh, you got to travel. That's so cool." And I was like, it was cool for a little bit of time, and then it wasn't.
So you're actually George Clooney in Up in the Air, is what you're telling me? Because that sounds exactly like him.
Yeah.
You ever seen that movie?
I have, yeah. I would say it was, there's some aspects of it that were probably true, but a lot of it was more kind of like theatrical.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was funny.
The fact that you did that's crazy.
But the just quick funny anecdote about that was in Atlanta. Atlanta is like a huge mecca town for like Delta, Sky Club. Like if they when like you were boarding in Atlanta, they're like any Delta credit card holders, and like half the plane already boards, right? And so because I was traveling so much, I was always getting upgraded, and I was like flying to New York a lot, and that's like a huge like a big like going from Atlanta to New York, right? A lot of like high profile, like million milers are flying. And so like everyone would always be sitting and to see who got upgraded, and I'd see my name get upgraded because I was traveling so much. And at that time I was like in my mid 20s, and I even looked younger than I am right now. And so like I would always see these like older folks who are like traveling all the time, like giving me like snark because I was the one who was upgraded. And I don't know, that's a weird travel. I don't know.
Well, you bring up
thing.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point. And with that, how is it how strong of a presence does Delta have in Atlanta? So you had mentioned that everyone's a Delta credit card holder. I mean, so do they give a lot back to the community with Atlanta? Yeah, it's like Zach and I have talked a lot about, we need more Fortune 500 companies here within the region so that they can continue to help build
from
the
tax
ecosystem.
dollars. They have to be giving a ton of money to the community.
So I don't know, right? Like it was. What I would say is that there was a venture fund. I can't think of the name real quick, but there was a venture fund in Atlanta, and it was started with I think it was the dean of engineering, going back to the Georgia Tech conversation, but like I think it was like the dean of engineering, and he went to one of his buddies and was like, we have so much talent and they're all leaving here, going to New York, going to San Francisco. Like, why are they not staying? We have some of the best Fortune 500 companies. What is happening, right? There's a disconnect. So what this venture fund did is they went and created like a bridge between Georgia Tech, the large corporations like the Deltas, the UPSs of the world. There's also a huge financial organization, I can't think of the name of it, that's there as well, Coca-Cola's. And then
Truist?
No, it wasn't Truist. It's a quant like hedge fund. No, I'll think of the name maybe later. But they more or less they brought up all of these folks and they said, hey, what are you guys working on? Right? Like what is like those strategic initiatives that you're working on? And then they would take that information, disseminate it down to like the teams at Georgia Tech, and then they would build it, right? And so that only happened a few years ago, and I just didn't see that level of cooperation between like UPS and Coca-Cola's of the world and like the startup ecosystems. There may be some comparatively to like the Bay Area, it was like night and day different, right? Like Salesforce, for example, like would constantly host happy hours or hackathons, or like startup ecosystem engagements. Like Google was doing the same thing. Yeah, there was much more like engagement with the startup ecosystem than what
it makes
was
sense
in the Atlanta area.
Yeah,
and the other thing,
one other thing.
Yeah, the other thing is like if you think of like these like UPS or Delta, they're physical goods, right? It's not software. So there's software components to them, right? But like a lot of like their core infrastructure and the product that they're delivering is more on the physical side. So there weren't like many cooperation opportunities versus like if you talk about Google or Salesforce, there's like ecosystems of software around them. So I think that was like an aspect of it. But I don't know, honestly. I was never in those conversations.
13 Fortune 500 companies in Atlanta. And
seems light.
So Home Depot, UPS, Delta, Coca-Cola, the Southern Company, Genuine Parts Company, Westrock, the Pulte Group, Newell Brands, AGCO, Intercontinental Exchange, Graphic Packaging Holdings Company, and last but not least,
Norfolk Southern. I knew you were going to say that. Sweet. Okay, so everything that you just said makes sense, but I think one of the struggles here is trying to get people to understand like that collaboration aspect of it, that actually opening the doors, that access that's lacking. What's in it for these companies? If you were to pitch these companies like, hey, like this is something that could be monumental to help, and it's providing that access. Like, what are the things that you would be telling them that it's a good idea? Because you've seen it in multiple cities, and then here, I think you would agree that like that access is lacking in the same way as other cities. Like, what are the benefits to the companies that would be providing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's that's a question we could take in a lot of different areas and go down the rabbit hole on it. But I think at the end of the day, it's the level of risk, right? A startup, it's like you start from nothing, right? The risk is you go back to nothing, right? A large corporation, you have a lot, right? And what you're aiming is not to lose anything, right? So their interpretation of the level of risk is really what a startup can provide to them, right? A startup will break things. It'll move fast. It'll push the boundaries of what, or one of the things that I think startups do really well is that they don't have the legacy knowledge of a industry. Therefore, they'll question everything. And they'll do a lot of things that, and someone who was in the industry for a really long time is like, no, don't do that. You can't do that. There's no way you can get past that wall, right? And a startup's like, watch me, right? And I think that collaboration between a large corporation and a startup, it can also be a really beautiful thing. However, I have seen it fail at a lot of times is that the level of risk is so the way two companies think about it completely differently. So I think when we were pitching with enterprises, whether it was working at 500 startups, whether it's within Virginia Beach, right? It's like to embrace risk, to embrace change. And I think by doing that, then it unlocks so much advantage for not only the company, the ecosystem, the people around it. Like taking risk is fun, right? Like I love working at startups because I get to take risk every single day. I can't work at a large company because they won't let me take risk, right? And so I think that's if I was going to like break it down to like one specific topic, it's the risk appetite. And I think that's what companies can provide for that.
I feel like the robots are listening, Zach. You know, right after I talked about the top 13, then I got a push notification from Chick-fil-A that almost like, hey, don't forget about me over here.
Yeah.
Well,
just for the purpose of this conversation, so you know, I call AI the robots.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. But do you think Chick-fil-A is open?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I got a push notification, so I would assume so.
Going back to the weather in Atlanta, there's a what's it called, a risk score of like how bad the weather is, depending on if the Waffle Houses are
Yeah,
open.
that's a real thing. Like,
Yeah. So the
yeah,
real
like
question is, Waffle House open here in Virginia Beach?
things
Not
got to be
Chick-fil-A.
really, really bad for the Waffle House to close. I mean,
Yeah.
like,
Wow.
yeah. So I want to get to GPT, and like, how did you get connected with them? How did that happen?
Yeah. So after 500, just quickly, just kind of like speeding through. So at 500, invested in a bunch of early stage companies, got to see, for example, the team at Solana was building in the 500 headquarters where I was working every single day. So I really got to see, and now I think their market cap or token cap is like $95 billion. So I got to like see from like rags to riches to an extent. I also got to see a lot of companies on the other side too. But and then I went in and sat on the investor relations side, helped raise $150 million fund, and raise money from institutional capital, such as endowments, sovereign wealth funds, etc. But after that, there's this quote that I have on my wall, and it's called "The Man in the Arena," and it's a Theodore Roosevelt quote, and it talks about it's really easy from outsiders to say what should be doing for those who are in the arena. And I always felt my entire career I was an outsider. Like I was a consultant, I worked in venture, right? And I was always telling people what they should be doing, right? But never really had the operator level of experience that I would have liked. And at that time was when if as a consultant you do well, right, then the project is completed and then you leave, right? So you never get to see things to completion too. So fast forward, I joined an early stage startup called Neotax. Neotax had the idea of automating small business taxes using AI. So this was back, I think, in 2018. And so AI was obviously a thing back then, but there were only like a small number of companies like really like on like building your own clusters and GPUs and training your own models. And the way we started building a lot of that or getting a lot of the training data was we offered the R&D tax credit for early stage startups or startups in general. So a tax credit called the R&D, I think got passed in like 2015, 16 that allowed for small businesses to claim it. It used to only be for large corporations, but a bill went to Congress that allowed for small businesses to claim it as a payroll tax credit. You used to have to pay it. It used to be an income tax credit, which means you had to make money. Startups didn't make money, but they did pay a lot in payroll. So then it became a payroll tax credit, which then unlocked this opportunity. So then we went after that, and I joined as the first business hire. And so really got to see building the company from the ground up around taxes and got really deep into like tax AI. And yeah, we got joined after we raised our seed round and got to see the company go and raise their A. I eventually went and led their business development and partnerships organization, worked with a lot of interesting partners such as Mercury Bank, as well as Thomson Reuters. So Thomson Reuters and Neotax have a strategic partnership together and got to see kind of like that enterprise plus startup relationship. There's a really unique value proposition and like, again, that level of risk working in taxes and kind of tagging on what we were talking about earlier. But what eventually happened is I eventually left Neotax shortly after the Thomson Reuters deal was closed. And and by that time I left California and moved to Virginia Beach with my wife. And I was taking time off to like figure out what I wanted to do next with my career. And it was interesting. It was the first time in my entire career, like I just took a break. And there's a fantastic book, if anyone is like trying to figure out what they want to do in their career, and I recommend it to everyone, but it's called Designing Your Life. I highly recommend you to read this, but it was like kind of the guideline and kind of told me to figure out what I wanted to do. So during that time, I started advising and consulting with a bunch of early stage startups. And my pitch to them was, hey, I've done this before. I've seen both on working at a large enterprise. I've worked on the venture side of the house. I understand like what what they're looking for, what it costs to raise, what the drawbacks and positives of raising capital, external capital. And I helped kind of build a sales organization from the ground up. And I failed more times than not. So I can tell you what not to do, right? To run into other speed bumps. And at that time, I was also helping, whether it was early stage venture funds such as Launch, or later stage venture funds, like identify potential investment opportunities. And during the time, Launch does this thing where they show a bunch of investors their upcoming cohort. And one of those companies was TaxGPT. And obviously my background around taxes, kind of building org from the ground up. And so I got to meet Kosh, and yeah, what started off as like a conversation of, hey, this is really cool and interesting. What are you building? Eventually turned into me joining as their chief revenue officer of November, I believe, of this year. And yeah, I saw the company go from making a nominal amount of money in revenue to, I think we're over like 10,000% growth in the last like 10 months or something like that. So like really exponential climb.
And I think that you guys just announced you raised your seed.
Yeah, we raised it a little bit before, but using press during tax season, taxes is on everyone's mind. That was kind of when we announced it. But yeah, I think we raised, I don't know what the number was, like 4.6, 4.8, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that was, it was interesting. I like the first time that we met, I think it was downtown Norfolk at Assembly, and I've been part of Jason's syndicate for a while. So I was exposed to them when they were going through the accelerator. So watching them pitching, as they would progress through the accelerator, and then man, it's just a reminder how small the world is. Yeah, that it's just kind of bizarre. It's goofy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. There's like 500 or Launch, right? Because I've been tied with like these early stage startup ecosystems, like I'll be wearing my 500 startups like jacket, like in the airport, and someone will be like, hey. I'm like, what? And it's like, hey, what are your relationship with 500? And I was like, oh, I used to work there. They're like, oh, my company that when I first started at a venture firm was backed by 500. And so we'd have like a conversation about like the startup ecosystem. And I think like that to me is one of the things I love about the startup ecosystem, because like working in a startup, we have this like mantra, and it's like a known thing. It's like startups helping startups, right? It's like, we all know that we're in like this crazy ecosystem and world. And if you can relate, right? Very similar to like what me and you bonded on Tim, was like the idea of like startups, right? And it creates like an overarching family. And I think a lot of people desire that for a lot of aspects in their life, and they want to find value and purpose. And I don't know, obviously I'm a huge fan of startups and recommend to only work at startups, but yeah, it creates like this bond immediately that you get from meeting people.
I think to the outside world, many people might only know this because of Matthew McConaughey, but can you roughly go over what an AI agent is and the use cases and how any of that, I say that because he has a commercial about it if you haven't seen it, Tim wouldn't know about because he didn't watch the Super Bowl.
I did not.
Anyway, what's the use case? How could someone get involved in that? Like, what is an AI agent? How does it work?
Yeah, I think maybe to like break down first is around like what is AI, and then I can go a little bit about agents. But the way I like to think about this is there's like a stack, right? Like a layer, right? So what AI is, for the general purpose, or like the way I like to conceptualize it, is it's the ability for a machine to learn various tasks or aspects of how someone does something, right? So an example around taxes, right? Tax professionals are constantly being asked questions about certain things, such as, I don't know, what is the standard deduction rate for a married couple filing jointly in Georgia, right? And then it gives them a response. The professional will give them a response. What the model does is takes that response and then replays it over and over and over and over again. And it's called a for loop for the people in like technology world, but it's more or less take that information and then replicate it again and ask that question in a different way, but try to get back the same answer and do it over and over and over again. And then take more of that data and information and then keep on retraining this model over and over again. And then again and again, and do it tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of times on every single task, on every single thing, do it over and over again. So in order to do that, you need something called a lot of compute, right? And this is the kind of aspects of, you hear about like the Stargate and the data centers and all that stuff. So in order to do this, what you need is something called like a data center, right? And at the bottom of the data, or at the bottom of it, it's the information or power. So it's the power grid to power the data center. Then the data center run these compute clusters, which allow people to run these queries, for loops over and over again, tens of hundreds of millions of times, right? To make sure that it's getting that information. This is called like pre-training learning. What sits on top of that data center is these AI models. And so they're the ones who are training these models on everything. And that's what they call is training on the internet at large, right? So they've really indexed the entire internet and said, train on every aspect of everything using all the information that we have, right? And so you have these foundational models, which are like open AIs of the world, the Llama 3s, the Groks, the Claudes, etc., right? So you have something called these foundational models. On top of those foundational models is what is happening is are called these application layers. And so it's saying, hey, now we can, what we used to do, so at Neotax, we were building our own foundational model. Like building our own compute clusters, training it over and over again, right? And it was very expensive to do. And startups couldn't do it. You needed a boatload of capital to do this. But then when the emergence of these AI or this application or AI model foundational layer came, then it all of a sudden allowed companies like TaxGPT to tap into that resource and then create verticalized, specialized areas, specifically in TaxGPT's instances around taxes. So then what you do on like this level is like, hey, I don't need the internet, right? I don't need everything about the internet in order for me to execute the task or the project that I'm at hand, right? All I need to know is about the tax code, for example, in our stance. What we do is then we take all this information and then we say, hey, if we're going to build a specialized, verticalized agent or model, how should we think about building that? One, and how do we think about building that from like to get the best output for our user base? And then secondly, how do we think about it for defensibility, right? We can't create just a wrapper around open AI like or ChatGPT and just call it TaxGPT. We did not create a wrapper. To an extent, we had to think about how do we build our own foundational model that one drives better accuracy, but two creates like that is the core of who TaxGPT is we created an AI, our company's AI first, meaning like that model runs everything that we do. So once we've finally created this model that is more accurate, more robust, not only has that pre-training data, but also now has post-training, which is now a bunch of users using that product going back into the loop. Then once we have that, how do we now redeploy this into various aspects? A lot of agents right now are kind of like chatbots, meaning that they're just retrieving information. You ask it a question, it gives you an output, right? You ask it a question, it gives you an output. That is what I would say 95% of what AI is today is just kind of a retrieval engine. But where this is going is, so in a tax situation, one of the things accountants do a lot is they complete the return and then they review the return. If you already have a bunch of the data and information of prior returns that have been audited, you have knowledge about the tax code, you could then build the model to say, hey, could you actually perform this review process? And could you do it autonomously? Could you just upload it and then all of a sudden you as an agent do exactly the same thing a reviewer would do, but based on all of the information and context that you have now? And so that is now the start of what agentic work is. It's that you're using first a human to do something, then you're using human and machine, and then you're eventually going to just use machine to do said task. But hopefully that was helpful, as I think you had to build a lot of context in order to get to like what an agent is.
How did you guys?
This is going to be the biggest. Like your explanation of that, sorry, Tim. Your explanation of that is going to be like the forefront of this channel now. Like people are like, "Oh, thank you for explaining what the robots are really." So,
how did you guys get data to train your model? I mean, just because so much of that is it's confidential information that whatever. So how were you able to train your model?
Yeah, the nice thing about the tax code is it's publicly available. Right. So all the governmental websites are publicly available. So all that information is like just can get web retrieval, and it's available for everyone to use. Right. We packaged it just a little bit differently. Right. There are, for example, proprietary data sources that we use, right, in which we negotiated contracts with, et cetera. And then ultimately, we also like create this thing called synthetic data. And I'm not going to go too crazy into this, but these AI foundational models have already tapped out on all the information that's available on the web. So if you have no more information, right, then how do you keep on retraining these models? Because the more information you give to the model, the better and better the responses become, right? The better and better the model that improves, right? So then you have to then think of, how do I use technology to then recreate proprietary data sets that then drive the output of my model? And so there's a lot of technical as well as proprietary stuff that we do that then subsequently then drives a better output for our model.
Who is your primary customer? Is it individuals, or is it accounting firms, or do you hope to attract bigger plays?
Yeah. So TaxGPT was started with the idea of like democratizing access to information in the tax code specifically, right? I think for me, I got to see working at KPMG, working on GE. I love to tell this story, but like GE was my first large client at KPMG, and I was on the audit side. And come tax season or come month end close or quarter end close, KPMG would back up a bus of these tax accountants, and they would just descend on GE, and they would make sure that they're like one, compliant, and then number two, taking advantage of the tax code, right? How taxes become like a strategic advantage to the business. I then go, my buddy's dad was a small business owner, like owned a bunch of real estate, restaurants, et cetera. And I would go talk to him about taxes, and his perspective of taxes were like, taxes just happen to me, right? I'm just navigating this crazy, complicated world of taxes, and he would pay much more in taxes and wouldn't take as much advantage of GE. And it wasn't that GE does anything illegal, right? It was just the access to the information in the tax code, right? He had a great accountant, but like that accountant didn't have the tens of thousands of resources that someone like KPMG did. So that was ultimately kind of like the essence of TaxGPT, which was democratizing access to the tax code. Using an AI model, not only can GE have access to it, but so can a small business owner, right? And I think by creating a level playing field at a business side and even individual side, like to me, that's what creates a better, I don't know, world to live in and something to worthwhile to wake up and to go do in the morning. But to answer your question, who is our core business user today? Today, it's tax firms, right? We solve a real pain point for them, right? They want to deliver that level of value to their customers that a KPMG does, right? But sometimes they don't have the resources and they don't have the money to do so. So by using a product like ours, it unlocks all of that, unlocks access to getting the most knowledgeable tax person expert in the world and employing it on your team at a fraction of the cost. So one of like the core use cases, if someone at KPMG partner spins off, starts his own firm, and is like, man, I don't have all the resources that I used to have. And then we come in and we can unlock a lot of them and then even make them much more productive. But we work with small firms such as like enrolled agents who are doing this on like during the tax season, right? They're just like helping people do returns and they just want to make sure that they're in compliance and knowledgeable, to top 10 accounting firms work with us today as well. So like our range is there. And then on top of that, we just started to provide services to those businesses. We work with, I can't disclose all the names, but we work with a restaurateur owner, right? Like my dad or my buddy's dad's business, to a Fortune 500 company. I can't disclose the name, but they may be located closely to me. And so I'm super excited about that. But yeah, so there's a lot of fun corporations that were more or less like, what they said is like, hey, we're internal tax departments at these large companies, and we operate exactly as a tax firm does. People all like our clients aren't businesses or individuals. Individuals are employees. Businesses are the business units of the organization, right? We have the exact same pain points. And so then,
well, it's interesting. This is like perfect case in point in terms of, I know that the accountants that I've talked to that own accounting firms, so we cannot hire accountants. Nobody wants to be an accountant anymore. So this is an area of like people, when they cry, oh, it's going to take all our jobs away. Well, it's filling the void of the vacancies of jobs, because it's just a line of work that nobody wants to do anymore.
And I'll even give you a better anecdote, is that we work with universities too, and students and professors. And I had a student the other day, he was like, I came into accounting because that was always the one that I heard like made the most money, right? And then it was tech. And then I was like, you know what, like I'm just gonna stick with this accounting thing. And then I got into tax, and I was deep into tax. And I was like, there's a lot of application, but it's like, no one cares about tax. No one likes tax. Tax is an afterthought. Tax is compliance. Tax is boring. And then I started using TaxGPT, and then he's now writing his master's thesis on our product, right? And he's like, I'm actually super excited to go into the workforce now because of this, right? And I think like that is the other thing, is like accounting and tax used to be like this or amazing profession, right? And then all of a sudden students just were set behind computers on spreadsheets doing mundane tasks, and not really driving the value that it can do for businesses.
Yeah, it's fascinating that, this is an opportunity. Like if you are a business owner, then you're multiple times more productive, able to generate more revenue with a reduced amount of tax, of workforce that is very difficult to obtain. I don't know. It's a brave new world, changing super fast.
If someone is on the fence about bots, what's your advice to them?
On the fence about AI?
Yeah, just like they're seeing it everywhere. They're hearing one side of it, they're hearing other side. Like, how would you encourage someone to, put a foot in?
I would equate it to like the computer, right? Or the cell phone, or all these other technological changes. Like that to me is like, AI is just another aspect of it. And I think you adopt to, like, again, it always goes back to risk, right? What is the level of risk that you're willing to take and that you want to take? And I think that's how I try to reframe the question versus AI versus like something that has already happened to them in their life.
I think the best quote that I've heard is, AI is not going to replace your job. Your job is going to be replaced by someone using AI.
Yep. 1000% agree.
Who was the quote from, Tim? You can't talk about quotes without quoting them.
It was a podcast, and I don't remember I don't remember who or what because they were quoting that, but I think that is super accurate. I mean, you've got to adopt it and have that become part of your life, or else you will get replaced by someone who is using it.
Yeah, I think it can amplify everything that you do, right? And it can reduce the shit you don't like doing. Sorry for cursing. I don't know if we're allowed cursing,
but you're good.
but like it can reduce the things. Like, for example, I replied to a bunch of emails every single day. I don't have to think about how to format them to make them sound professional in a friendly tone or whatever it may be. I just want to like word vomit into a ChatGPT or like instance and just say, produce an output in my tone. And then all of a sudden that saves 30 seconds. I do that 100 times a day, right? Like I'm talking about tangible time savings. And so like my point of view is just use it, because like the one thing that I like to say to my team is our job is to give people a really amazing user experience and then let them dream, right? And then once they start to dream about what this can do, we already have a product that can support that, right? And I think that's the essence of like any technology, is like to dream as like, what could this be like if everything goes right, right? And be a little bit more optimistic versus pessimistic on this side of it.
Well, my dream is for accounting and tax services to change their business model and move away from typically they charge by number of pages of forms that they have to complete. And so when you have like 15 K1s that they're processing and you're charging for every K1 and all they're doing is just transferring a couple digits, whether if it's a loss or a gain, I hope that that you all can change that business model, because it's just done. AI doesn't get tired, and they just keep on doing it, and they do it better and faster than a human would.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, it's like I don't think our job is to change their business model. I think our job is to empower them.
Yeah,
they can figure out on the market will then change their business model.
That's right.
I never knew that's
100% agree.
Yeah, I never knew that's what the charge was for, like that. Ugh.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think all of them do it that way, but that is a pretty common practice to charge by the number of pages.
Yeah, or hour. I mean, a lot of them run at like, at the end of the day, these are services businesses, right? So how much am I paying this person? Divide by what, 20, 80 hours in a week, right? That's, and their benefits, right? So that's how much this person needs to drive an output. And so at KPMG, you would have something called a utilization rate. And at certain levels, at like an associate, your utilization rate had to be 115%. And that percent was a margin that they were having on top of you, right? And so it's like that is how the business and services industry is run. Now with AI, it's like all of a sudden it's like we can reduce that margin, or we can increase that margin by driving more productivity, right? Because you get much more time savings back. So, but all of a sudden it blows up their internal calculations around how they've been operating businesses. So like, yeah, there's gonna be tons of disruption and change when it comes to pricing and models.
So do you enjoy your time in the arena now that you're in there fighting the fight? You happy?
Yeah, I would. I think it's, I'd encourage anyone to find something that they are passionate about and they love and enjoy it. I think going back to the book, Designing Your Life. I don't know. I can't see it right now, but it's called Designing Your Life. It's by two Stanford professors. The summary of the book is two Stanford professors were doing design thinking, which is like all around like product development. And these two professors bonded in that working at Stanford, you get kind of like the top 1% of kind of folks or people in the world, I guess. I don't know. But you got a lot of really educated people, and a lot of their questions weren't about like product development. It was like, what do I do next in my career? And they're like, could we take design thinking principles and apply it to purpose of life? And one of the and so in the book, they have a bunch of like activities you can do. And one of them is there's something called a flow state. Like when you're doing something, whether it's a podcast or something, and that time it just disappears, right? And what you do in the exercise is have a notebook. I have a notebook right next to me, but have a notebook and write down what is occurring at that point in time that you're in flow state. And then what you'll start doing is that you'll start seeing patterns around what is happening when you're in that flow state, right? And then you try to align your day into those things. And so like, for me, that's what startups are on an almost like daily basis. It's like entering that flow state. Now the flow state's not always fun, right? It's like putting out fires, like, negotiating contracts, like doing all of the like boring things, but like you're doing it because you have a purpose. And I think that's what I'd highly encourage people to just try to find.
Bill Burnett, Dave Evans sound familiar?
I think that's right.
How to Build a Well-Lived, Joyful Life. We're going to assume
that's
it.
You're right.
22,000 reviews, ratings, so that's pretty good.
It's fantastic. Like and like the other thing is, one of the things I mentioned about the book, it's not like a point in time. It's not like you go revisit that flow state journal, for example, just one time, and then all of a sudden you figured out your flow state. Like that changes throughout your life, right? And so it's like it's a constant evolution of those things.
Well, you've been here for 2 years. Yeah, you've been here for a couple of years now. Favorite food of the region or favorite place to for dining pleasure?
Dining pleasure. I'd have to say the back deck out in Chicks Beach. It's a great place to like view the sunset. You can get oysters. And really like disconnect for a second for the world, right? And I think my wife and I moved to Virginia Beach because of our love for the ocean. So yeah, I would say it's definitely there.
Is that a first time, Zach? First time mentioned?
I was thinking he's saying the porch, but now it's really the back deck. I've been there once or twice. Good place. It's right
Very
behind.
cool.
There's like a seafood market in there. So
yep, you can get so you can get oysters, you can get fresh catch. Like I'll go there too to just like get food and come take home and shuck oysters in the backyard. It's not a bad way to live.
Not a bad way at all. Well, Taylor, thanks so much, man.
Coming from the guys who don't eat oysters.
Don't say that too loud. I don't need Bay hunting me down. I committed to Bay.
Fine. Bay McLaughlin, I think is his last name, not Bay as in like Beyonce.
Yeah. Right.
Anyway, Taylor, appreciate your time. This is a blast. And maybe we'll meet in person sometime. Yeah,
likewise. I may have to call you to come plow my driveway to come get me out of here. I may be stuck here for a while.
Let me know. It's snowing again, by the way.
I know.
Nice. Zach will load up a shovel, hop in the Jeep, and head on down to the ocean front.
Yeah, I wonder how much money I can make doing that.
A lot.
I got to buy a plow. Let's go.